Europe thought it had replaced one energy dependency. It stopped leaning on Russian pipeline gas, rushed towards seaborne fuels, and congratulated itself for becoming safer. But tucked behind that victory is a quieter dependency, a surprisingly small, aging fleet of gas tankers moving propane and butane across oceans. Those ships rarely make headlines, yet when they tighten, heating bills, petrochemical margins, and even shipping economics across Europe start to warp. This is not really a story about LNG terminals or politicians announcing energy security. It is a story about the logistics layer underneath the slogans. Propane and butane, the two main liquefied petroleum gases, look simple on paper. They can heat homes, feed steam crackers, balance refineries, and substitute for other fuels in moments of stress. But moving them at scale depends on very large gas carriers, medium gas carriers, storage caverns, export docks, and timing so precise that one delay in the US Gulf can echo into Northwest Europe weeks later. The central thesis is this: Europe did diversify away from one visible energy risk, but in doing so, it exposed itself to a hidden transport bottleneck, where an aging LPG fleet and opaque shipping practices now shape prices almost as much as supply itself. To see how that happened, start with the break. In 2022, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe redrew its energy map at high speed. Pipeline gas flows changed. Refiners re-optimized. Petrochemical buyers hunted for replacement molecules. U.S. exports of propane and butane became far more strategic than most consumers realized. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the United States has been the world's largest LPG exporter in recent years, shipping several million barrels per day of propane and propylene combined. Several million barrels per day. That matters because the Atlantic Basin suddenly had to do more work faster with infrastructure that was never designed for a permanent emergency posture. A lot of that cargo leaves from the U.S. Gulf Coast, especially terminals around Texas. It crosses the Atlantic to the Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp hub, the giant storage and trading heart of Northwest Europe. On a spreadsheet, that route looks manageable. In the real world, it depends on vessel availability, weather windows, berth congestion, canal choices, insurance, and ship age. And ship age is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Whispering. Many LPG carriers serving global trade are no longer young assets. Brokers and fleet databases have shown a meaningful share of very large gas carriers moving well past the midpoint of their commercial lives, with a limited order book relative to what energy traders would prefer in a volatile market. That does not mean old ships are automatically unsafe. It means flexibility shrinks, maintenance grows, off-hire risk rises, financing gets harder, insurance scrutiny gets tougher. In logistics, the problem is rarely that the system stops. The problem is that it keeps moving, just slower and at a much higher price. I think this is one of the most misunderstood ideas in energy markets. People imagine shortages as empty tanks. Often the real shortage is transport confidence. If traders are unsure whether the right ship will be open in the right week at the right freight rate, they bid differently, they store differently, they hedge differently, and consumers feel that uncertainty long before they understand it. Look at the mechanics. A propane cargo in the US Gulf is not useful to Europe until it is chilled, loaded, financed, insured, shipped, discharged, stored, and delivered into local networks. If freight spikes, the landed cost rises even when the molecule itself is not scarce. If a vessel is delayed, a petrochemical buyer may pay up for prompt replacement barrels. If terminal slots tighten, traders can no longer arbitrage small regional price gaps. Suddenly, what looked like a commodity market starts behaving like a queue. Reuters and major shipbroking reports have repeatedly noted how vessel availability can amplify LPG price swings, especially when Asian demand competes with Atlantic demand for the same pool of carriers. That competition matters because Asia, especially China and India, can often pull cargoes east when margins justify it. So Europe is not simply buying propane. It is bidding for logistics against the rest of the world. And then there is the shadow layer. After sanctions on Russian energy reshaped tanker markets, a so-called shadow fleet became a familiar phrase in oil. LPG is less discussed, but the same market stress changed behavior across gas shipping too. Older tonnage stayed active longer, compliance complexity increased, and some ships that mainstream charterers treat cautiously still found employment in more opaque trades. That matters even for legal European imports, because every vessel tied up in less transparent routes is one less vessel adding elasticity to the open market. Europe wanted optionality. Instead, it bought itself a new dependence on marine availability, not on one country this time, but on steel, schedules, and freight math. There is something almost cruel about that. You solve the visible geopolitical problem, then discover the invisible logistical one was waiting underneath. Data from the International Energy Agency and market coverage from Bloomberg have shown how Europe's energy system since 2022 has become more dependent on imported seaborne fuels across categories. LPG is smaller than LNG in headlines, but it punches above its weight in specific sectors. For households off the gas grid, it is a direct heating fuel. For petrochemicals, propane is a feedstock. For refineries and traders, it is a balancing molecule. When shipping tightens, all three channels feel it differently, but they feel it at once. Here is the part that I find most revealing. The bottleneck is not only the number of ships, it is the age profile, plus geography, plus timing. A very large gas carrier can move huge volumes efficiently, but only between ports that can handle it. Smaller ships are more flexible, but less economical per ton. Storage in Europe can cushion shocks, but only for a while. Mild weather buys time. A cold snap destroys it. One refinery outage changes blending demand. One storm in the Gulf Coast pushes loading dates. One charter delay cascades into another. This is domino economics. Mini hook. But the most expensive distortion is not where most people look. Many viewers assume the pain shows up mainly in winter heating. It does. But petrochemicals may be the sharper signal. European crackers and chemical plants already face high energy costs compared with US and Middle Eastern rivals. If propane feedstock arrives late or expensive, margins get squeezed further. The effect can ripple into plastics, packaging, industrial inputs, and manufacturing competitiveness. In plain English, an old ship leaving Texas late can quietly make a factory in Belgium less competitive a month later. That is the hidden architecture of power in commodity markets. Not just who owns reserves, who controls movement, who can absorb delay, who has spare ships, who has storage, who can wait. The The consumer sees a heating bill. The trader sees freight optionality. The chemical producer sees margin compression. The ship owner sees a market where old steel suddenly earns strategic rent. But wait, there is one twist almost no mainstream energy coverage explains. Tight LPG shipping can also distort decisions in completely different fuel markets. If propane is expensive or delayed, some buyers switch to naphtha where possible. If naphtha demand shifts, refinery economics change. If refinery yields change, other product balances move too. So the bottleneck is not trapped inside one niche cargo. It leaks into the wider hydrocarbon system. That helps explain why Europe's cleaner transition fuel story is messier than advertised. Propane burns cleaner than coal, and often cleaner than heavier fuel alternatives in specific uses. Fine. But cleaner at the point of combustion does not mean simpler in the chain of delivery. And in my view, this is where policymakers repeatedly underestimate logistics.